This is Japi, and welcome to Japi Podcasts.
In partnership with Torrent Pharma, by the makers of Nebicard and Telsar Biso, where science meets care.
I am Dr. Ashok Taneja. Welcome to the JAPI podcast of the October 2025 issue of JAPI Volume 73, Issue 10. This issue of JAPI has some really interesting articles, including 13 original articles, 3 review articles, 1 point of view, 1 consensus guideline, and 2 letters of correspondences. Let's discuss these in detail. The first original article is titled Gastric Emptying Patterns in Type 2 Diabetes Mellitus Patients with Symptoms of Gastroparesis and Impact of Levosulfide on These Patterns. This is by Ravi Kant and et al. A common yet often overlooked complication of type 2 diabetes mellitus is the diabetic gastroparesis, which impairs gastric motility and significantly reduces quality of life. This study evaluates the efficacy of levosulfuride in managing diabetic gastroparesis and its impact on gastric scintigraphy patterns. This analytical observational studies included 27 adults with type 2 diabetes and gastroparesis conducted at a tertiary care hospital in North India from April 2021 to 2022. Patient received 25 mg of levosulfuride twice daily for 4 weeks. Gastroparesis symptoms were assessed using Gastroparesis Cardinal Symptoms Index. Gastric motility was evaluated by a gastric scintigraphy before and after treatment. The results showed significant improvement in GCSI score. Gastric scintigraphy revealed significant changes, with 66.7% of patients demonstrating normalized mortality patterns post-treatment. While delayed gastric emptying persisted in some areas, levosulfuride alleviated key symptoms like nausea, vomiting, and early satiety. So the conclusion is the levosulfuride significantly alleviated symptoms of diabetic gastroparesis as evidenced by reduced GCSI score and improved in gastric scintigraphy patterns. Despite minimal changes in delayed gastric emptying, the drug's effect on motility dysfunction highlights its therapeutic potential. This study underscores the importance of focusing on motility patterns in symptom management, suggesting levosulfuride as a promising option for targeted treatment of diabetic gastroparesis. The next article is on impact of focused thesis writing workshop on knowledge and confidence of medical postgraduate students. It's a cross-sectional study by Meenakshi Bothra et al. A cross-sectional mixed method study was conducted involving 68 postgraduate students from various medical disciplines who participated in a thesis writing workshop. Participants were administered pre- and post-test questionnaire to assess their knowledge of key thesis writing components, including literature review, results, discussion, and conclusion. The pre- and post-test scores showed a significant improvement in knowledge, particularly in the areas of literature review, results, and discussion. The p-value was less than 0.05. However, the improvement in knowledge regarding thesis conclusions was not statistically significant. Feedback from participants indicated high satisfaction with the workshop, with 85% reporting increased confidence in their thesis writing skills. Conclusion is, a focused one-day workshop significantly improved the knowledge and confidence of medical postgraduate students in thesis writing. The study advocates for the integration of similar workshops into postgraduate curricula. The next original article is titled The Prevalence of Allergic Bronchopulmonary Aspergillosis in severe asthma patients presenting to a tertiary care hospital in northwest India by Shweta Gupta et al. The background and introduction is the allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, also known as ABPA, is a hypersensitivity reaction to Aspergillus fumigatus. It is commonly seen in patients with bronchial asthma and cystic fibrosis, leading to airway inflammation, mucus plugging, and irreversible bronchiectasis if untreated. The objective is to determine the prevalence of ABPA among severe asthma patients in a tertiary care hospital in Northwest India. Methodology is a prospective longitudinal study was conducted between August 2022 and July 2023, enrolling 247 patients diagnosed with severe asthma as per GINA 2022. Results are 55.5% were females, normal N is 137, mean age was 46.3 plus minus 16.3 years, mean AEC 901.8 plus minus 404.8 cells per microliter, mean total IgE 2874.9 plus minus 2701.5 international units per ml. 63.2% were diagnosed with ABPA per ISH-AM criteria. Mean age of ABPA patients is 41.6 years. Among ABPA cases, ABPA-B, that is with bronchiectasis, 31.5% ABPA-S, that means serologic, 68.5% means statistical find, were having ABPA cases. Statistical findings are higher IgE levels were associated with more severe disease. Female predominance was noted but is statistically insignificant. Now, coming to the discussion and comparison, the overall prevalence of ABPA, 63.2%, is amongst the highest reported in India. Other Indian studies have shown variable prevalence. Bhakur et al. 68.5%, Mathur et al. 56%, Sarkar et al. 38.6%. Regional variations could be due to environmental factors, climate, and air quality differences. Early identification of ABPA can help prevent irregular lung damage. So the conclusion of this study is high prevalence 63.2% of ABPA in severe asthma patients. Environmental and regional factors likely influence occurrence. Routine ABPA screening should be incorporated into severe asthma management. Need for region-specific preventive, diagnostic, and management studies should be there. Now, the next article is assessed, that is assessment of nutritional status using body composition analysis in cardiac surgery and risk association with acute kidney injury by Georgie Abraham et al. Poor nutritional status prior to surgery in cardiac patients is one of the risk factors for acute kidney injury, morbidity, and mortality. This study was conducted with the objective of assessment of nutritional status of cardiac surgery patients using body composition measures, that is BCM, and other biochemical parameters. Preoperative body mass index, that is BMI, before the operation of the patients showed that the majority of them were overweight with a mean BMI of 26.55 plus minus per kg per square meter. There were no significant changes in the BCM results for protein weight in either study group. There was a significant loss of body fat in all patients, but it was higher in patients who developed AKI. The skeletal muscle mass in both groups showed no significant change. Those who developed AKI postoperatively had a higher preoperative visceral fat area and percentage body fat compared to patients who did not develop AKI. The authors concluded that the patient had lost body fat post-surgically. Those who were diagnosed with AKI had overhydration, high waist circumference, and VFA preoperatively. Coming to the next article, which is titled Prostatic Valve Thrombosis, that is fibrinolysis, surgery, or percutaneous manipulation, by Shankar Mashigar et al. The retrospective study included a total number of 20 cases of prostatic valve thrombosis, that is PVT, involving left-sided bileaflet St. Jude's prosthesis Medtronic Hall 3 and a single pulmonary prosthesis between 2021 and 2023. Depending on the response to thrombolysis, patients were categorized as responders or non-responders. Responders were those individuals who had clinical improvement accompanied by a reduction in transvalvular gradient by 70% and restoration of disc mobility on fluoroscopy. Non-responder had little or no clinical improvement and transvalvular gradients were reduced by less than 50% from basal values, with sluggish or only single leaflet mobility on fluoroscopy. The non-responders were subsequently treated either by interventional procedure or by surgical valve replacement. 2 patients with mitral PVT underwent transcatheter manipulation of the prostatic valve disc. Streptokinase, that is STK fibrinolysis, provided excellent results in 66.6% of cases with thrombosed St. Jude mitral prosthesis and 55.5% in entire series. Percutaneous manipulation of the mitral disc proved a useful adjuvant in 2 cases. Retiplase produced gratifying results in the single case with pulmonary mechanical prosthesis. However, thrombosed aortic prosthesis responded unfavorably to fibrinolysis in this series. About 6 patients who failed to respond to thrombolysis had excellent results with valve replacement surgery. 2 patients, that is 10%, succumbed due to extremely high-risk clinical characteristics. To conclude, prostatic valve thrombosis is common in females with AF, low output, and subtherapeutic INR. STK-based thrombolysis can be therapy of first choice with gratifying results in thrombosed St. Jude mitral prosthesis. Percutaneous transcatheter manipulation of the prostatic disc is an alternative modality in high surgical risk patients. Valve replacement surgery was safe and life-saving in individuals with thrombolysis failure. The next original article is titled Serum Liver Enzymes in Metabolic Syndrome and Non-Metabolic Syndrome Patients. It's a case-control study by Anjali B. Patel et al. An observational case-control study was carried out on a total of 100 patients, 50 cases of MET as defined by the International Diabetes Federation, 2005, and 50 age and gender match controls non-MET-S patients aged more than 18 years at a tertiary care hospital in Western India. The results were the maximum number of patients with MET-S were more than 50 years of age with male predominance, that is 78%, and a high prevalence of diabetes, hypertension, and central obesity among them as major components of MET-S. Liver function tests such as GGT, SGPT, SGOT, and CRP1 significantly raised in MET-S patients compared to non-MET-S patients. The majority of the MET-S patients with deranged liver function tests had fatty liver on USG abdomen. So, conclusion is the study shows a significant association between elevated levels of GGT, SGPT, SGOT, CRP, and fatty liver in MET-S patients compared to non-MET-S patients. The next original article is Beliefs and Perceptions of Non-Intensivists towards the Role of Intensivist Leadership in Intensive Care Unit and impact of intensivist on patient-driven outcomes in India is a descriptive survey by Rajesh C. Mishra et al. Critical care medicine in India is at an important turning point. Most intensive care units in the country still function as open or semi-open models, where both the admitting consultant and intensivist share patient care responsibilities. While this structure allows flexibility, it also creates ambiguity in leadership and accountability. The concept of a closed ICU, where a trained intensivist takes the lead in all aspects of care, is still not widespread. Yet, growing evidence and evolving perception suggest that such a model could significantly improve outcomes, efficiencies, and communication in critical care settings. The intensivist brings a unique skill set that integrates specialized knowledge of complex physiology, organ support, and multidisciplinary coordination. Non intensivist consultants, particularly in India, semi open and close coordination and close ICU are increasingly acknowledging the importance of this expertise. Many agree that intensivist led care facilitates smoother decision making, reduces unnecessary investigations, and optimizes resource utilization, ultimately decreasing the cost of care without compromising the quality. Beyond clinical management, intensivists play a crucial role in communicating with patient families, often navigating sensitive discussions about prognosis, end of life care, and treatment limitations with clarity and empathy. This improved communication can reduce misunderstandings, prevent conflicts, and lower the risk of litigation, which remains a growing concern in healthcare. An equally important yet less discussed aspect is the effect of intensivist leadership on team dynamics. When intensivist assumes clinical and administrative authority, decision making becomes more cohesive and less stressful for the admitting consultants. This shared structure reduces burnout and creates a sense of direction and confidence among all members of the care team. As hospitals expand their critical care capacity, intensivists are also emerging as key leaders in code blue teams, trauma response, and antibiotic stewardship programs, initiatives that enhance patient safety across the hospital ecosystem. However, the challenges persist. The shortage of formally trained intensivists, limited awareness among administrators, and inadequate institutional support for closed ICU models continue to slow the progress. Strengthening critical care training programs, defining clear leadership roles, promoting interdepartmental collaborations are essential steps towards addressing these gaps. The changing perception of intensivists in India reflects a broader recognition of critical care as an independent and indispensable specialty, empowering intensivists as both clinical leaders and system architects will not only enhance the patient outcomes but also build a more resilient and efficient critical care framework for the future. The next original article is titled Utility of CHA2 DS2 VACSC score in predicting contrast induced nephropathy in patients with acute myocardial infarction following percutaneous coronary angiography. A cross-sectional study in South India by Ramaya R. Bhatt et al. This cross-sectional research has been carried out at a tertiary care hospital. The study comprised a total of 182 patients who were admitted with ACS and underwent PCI. CIN incidence was computed. The study population was divided into two groups, the CIN group and non-CIN group, based on the incidence of CNI. The CHAD-2 DS2 VAC C score was computed for every patient. The incidence of CIN among patients undergoing PCI was 14.3%, and the ROC value for the CHA2 DS2-VASC score was 0.896. Statistically significant increases in the incidence of CIN were observed in patients undergoing PCI who had a CH2 DS2-VASC score of more than 2. Additionally, a significant relationship was discovered between CIN and age, diabetes, hypertension, primary CAD, and CLIP class more than 2. Conclusion is patient with CHA2DS2-VASC score of more than 2 had higher incidence of CIN. Such score was found to be very useful in predicting contrast nephropathy among patients with acute myocardial infarction undergoing angiography and angioplasty. The next paper is titled Clinical Biochemical Profile and Outcomes of Cerebral Venous Thrombosis in Purpural and Non-Purpural Presentations, a prospective observational study from Northwest India by Kamlesh Kumar et al. The objective was to evaluate the clinical profile, etiological factors, treatment outcomes, and prognosis of CVT patients with a focus on comparing purpural and non-purpural cases in a tertiary care setting in Northwest India. The prospective observational study included 80 adults patients diagnosed with CVT via CTV or magnetic resonance venography over a 2-year period. Results were purpural females were younger than other groups. Common symptoms include headache, 85%, seizure, 45%, focal deficit, 47.5%, hyperhomocystinemia, 65%, and vitamin B12 deficiency, 51.25% were prevalent, particularly among males and non-purpural females. Anemia was significantly more common in females. No significant difference was noted in clinical outcomes across the groups. Poor prognosis was associated with Glasgow Coma Scale of less than 8, focal deficits, and low vitamin B12 levels. In-hospital mortality was 6.25%. 97% of the survivors had favorable outcomes, that is, MRS was less than 3 at 3 months. So the conclusion is the CVT in Northwest India affects a similar number of males and non-purpural females. Nutritional deficiency, particularly vitamin B12 and anemia, play a crucial role. Early diagnosis and appropriate anticoagulation therapy are critical for favorable outcomes. Now moving on to the next original article, which is titled The Usage of Guideline-Directed Medical Therapy in Patients with Heart Failure and Reduced Ejection Fraction in a Tertiary Care Hospital by Sevin George et al. The study evaluated the prevalence, adequacy, and barriers to the use of guideline-mediated medical therapy GDMT among patients with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction in a tertiary care center in southern India. This cross-sectional study included 102 adult patients with an ejection fraction of less than 40% who had no treatment for at least 3 months. Patients were categorized based on GDMT prescription into 3 groups: those receiving all 3 recommended drugs disease, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, ARNIs, beta blockers, and MRAs at optimal doses, those receiving all 3 classes at suboptimal doses, and those missing 1 or more drug cases. The mean age of participant was 54 years, with 89% being males and 84% having ischemic heart disease as the underlying cause. The study found that only 10.8% patients received all 3 drugs classes at optimal doses, while 62.7% were prescribed all classes but at suboptimal doses, and 26.5% were not prescribed the full combination therapy. Although the prescription rates for ACE inhibitors, ARBs, ARNI, beta blockers, and MRAs were high, that is above 83%, only a minority achieved target dosages, that is 45.7% for ACE inhibitors, ARBs, ARNIs, and 20% for beta blockers. Sodium glucose cotransponders 2, that is SGLT2 inhibitors, a relatively newer addition to GDMT, were prescribed to 35% of patients, usually as a part of quadruple therapy. Key factors limiting optimal GDMT use included renal impairment, low blood pressure, and electrolyte abnormalities, all of which led to physicians' reluctance in prescribing or titration certain drugs. Patients with a longer duration of heart failure treatment, that is more than 1 year, were more likely to be on optimized therapy, suggesting the role of sustained follow-up and dose adjustment over time. So, in conclusion, the study highlights a significant gap between clinical guidelines and real-world practice, with only 1 in 10 heart failure patients receiving optimal GDMT dosing. Addressing patient-specific barriers like renal dysfunction, hypotension, alongside improving follow-up mechanism could substantially enhance heart failure outcomes in similar tertiary care settings. The next original article is titled "A Cross-Sectional Study of Medication Identification Patterns Among Patients Attending the Medicine Outpatient Department in a Tertiary Hospital in Rural Gujarat." It is by Poonam Bhende et al. Background is the number of people living with multiple chronic medical conditions has risen, and with it, the number of medications taken by them. In addition to adherence to medications, it is extremely important to correctly identify the medications. Medication errors occur at all steps, with polypharmacy, low literacy, language barrier, old age, and lack of communication as contributing factors. Many of the patients may not be identifying medications themselves or may be doing so incorrectly. Hence, this study is aimed to check the method used by the patient to identify medicines. Materials and methods are: a total of 150 patients attending the outpatient department of the medicine department were interviewed using a structured questionnaire which had multiple choice questions and one open-ended question. The results were: most, 85.33% of the patients had a chronic medical condition, out of which 37.33% had 2 or more clinical conditions. Physical attributes of the tablets, that 60%, and packaging, 39.33%, were used commonly to identify these medications. About 10.6% did not identify the medications themselves. Again, 45.33% of the patients depended on the doctor's prescription for the dosing of medications. Patients felt that identification of the medication would be easier if the content on packaging included indication was written in the local language and was in bold font. They also felt that healthcare professionals spending more time explaining would help them. So the conclusion is that irrespective of the level of education, language known, and the number of comorbidities, physical attributes and packaging were most commonly used to identify the medications. The next original article is titled "A Assessment of Hemoglobinopathies in Antenatal Females" by Charushila Gore et al. This study evaluated 800 antenatal females aged 20 to 39 years with almost equal distribution between age groups that is 20 to 29 was 49.23%. 57% were between 30 to 39 years of age. Peripheral blood smear analysis revealed 97.69% had microcytic hypochromic anemia, indicating a high prevalence of iron deficiency, whereas 2.31% exhibited normocytic normochromic anemia. Hemoglobin electrophoresis identify the hemoglobinopathies in 1.72% of the cases, with 1.3% cases identified as beta thalassemia carriers and 0.19% with sickle cell trait. Among the abnormal cases, beta thalassemia, which was around 55.56%, was found to be most common, followed by HBE heterozygous, that is 11.11%, HBE homozygous 11.11%, and double heterozygous again 11.11%, with a single case 11.11% of sickle cell disease. So the conclusion is, this study emphasizes the importance of routine screening for hemoglobinopathies in pregnant women, particularly in regions with known genetic predispositions. Increased awareness and follow-up molecular analysis were recommended for accurate diagnosis and management, ultimately improving the maternal and fetal outcomes. Next, the function of platelet to lymphocyte ratio and neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio in assessing disease activity in rheumatoid arthritis patient by Himanshu Mehta et al. The original article titled "The Function of Platelet to Lymphocyte Ratio and Neutrophil to Lymphocyte Ratio in Assessing Disease Activity in Rheumatoid Arthritis Patient." This cross-sectional research study included 381 RA patients. The clinical disease activity assessment was used to evaluate activity of the disease in addition to demographic and disease-related variables. Based on pre-established CDAI cutoff values, the participants were categorized into 4 groups. For each patient, laboratory analysis including the following: C-reactive protein, ESR, CBC. The conventional procedure was followed in the appropriate computation of PLR and NLR. The 4 patients group NLR and PLR values were compared, and the relation among disease activity indices and NLR and PLR was investigated using Pearson correlation analysis. In patient, the mean PLR was 132.8 plus minus 127.7, and the mean NLR was 3.6 plus minus 2.6. Patient with low disease activity had a substantial lower mean PLR. P-value was 0.021 in comparison to those with higher disease activity. The mean NLR in relation to CDAI was not observed to be statistically significant. P-value was 0.69 across the 4 groups. While there was a weak positive association between PLR and the physician visual analog scale VAS R is equal to 0.22, patient VAS R is equal to 0.12, and CDAI R is equal to 0.17, there was no correlation among CDAI and specific disease indices with NLR according to Pearson correlation analysis. So to conclude, the PLR, not the NLR, may be an effective biomarker for evaluating the disease activity level in RA patients, particularly heart disease activity. The next 3 are review articles. Fosfomycin tromethanil, a urinary antibiotic by Abhijit A. Tralokia et al. UTI is the most common type of infection. It is the second most common in the human being. It is one of the most prevalent conditions in medical practice, with approximately 150 million cases occurring globally each year. Approximately 50% of the women will experience at least one episode of UTI during their lifetime, and between 20 and 40% will have recurrent episodes. The discovery of broad-spectrum antibiotic phosphomycin tromethamine occurred in Spain in 1969 and is prominently used in the management of uncomplicated UTIs. As a phosphonic acid derivative, phosphomycin acts by disrupting the bacterial cell wall synthesis by inhibiting the enzymes MURA, demonstrating effective activity against a wide variety of gram-negative and gram-positive pathogens comprising multi-drug resistant strains such as E. coli and Klebsiella pneumoniae. Mean peak urinary concentration of phosphomycin ranging from 1053 to 4415 milligram per liter occurs within 4 hours of absorption of single oral dose of phosphomycin tromethamine, corresponding to phosphomycin of 3 gram. Urinary concentration of more than 128 milligram per liter, which were adequate to inhibit most urinary pathogens, are maintained for 24 to 48 hours following a single oral dose of phosphomycin. This makes it particularly advantageous for uncomplicated UTIs, where it offers convenient and effective single-dose treatment option for treating acute, uncomplicated, lower UTI in adults. So, the conclusion is the phosphomycin remains a robust and indispensable antibiotic in the management of uncomplicated UTIs with a distinct pharmacological profile that ensures both efficacy, safety, and patient compliance due to single-dose regime. The next review article is titled Achieving Diabetes Remission, Current Guidelines and Emerging Pharmacotherapies in India by Arpan and Navrajbir Singh et al. Type 2 diabetes mellitus remission has emerged as a critical area of research and clinical interest, especially in India, where diabetes prevalence is rising at an alarming rate. Achieving remission through pharmacological, dietary, and surgical interventions is now an attainable goal for subset of patients. This systemic review synthesizes evidence from clinical trials, emerging pharmacological interventions, and current guidelines for diabetic remissions. We explore the mechanism of diabetes reversal, highlighting novel agents such as GLP-1 receptor agonist, GLP-1 agonist and GLP agonist, and SGLT2 inhibitors. This review also addresses the long-term sustainability of remission, epidemiological trends in India, and current treatment recommendations, integrating data from major studies. The findings underscores the need for patient-centered, evidence-based approach to diabetes management. Additionally, we discuss the role of continuous glucose monitoring, that is CGM, dietary interventions, and the benefits of millet consumptions in diabetes remission. The final review article is titled Review of Safety and Efficacy of Polmacoxib, a novel dual inhibitor of cyclooxygenase 2 and carbonic anhydrase in osteoarthritis and acute painful conditions, by Vijaya Sandeep Gunjal et al. Osteoarthritis is a chronic degenerative joint disorder and leading cause of pain and disability among the elderly. Traditional non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, that is NSAIDs, though effective in symptom relief, pose significant risk of gastrointestinal, cardiovascular, and renal complications, especially in long-term use. Polmacoxib, that is CG100649, is a newer NSAID with dual inhibitory role on cyclooxygenase 2, that is COX2, and carbonic anhydrase CA, planned to offer higher therapeutic efficacy and safety. This review critically examines the pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic properties of polmacoxib along with its clinical efficacy and safety in OA and acute pain conditions. Clinical trials across phases 1 to 3 consistently show polmacoxib to be well tolerated, effective in pain relief, efficient improvement of the joint, with a safety profile compared to or even better than traditional COX-2 inhibitors like celecoxib. Recent trial also explored its role in combination therapies for acute pain management, including dental and post-operative settings, showing non-inferiority to standard regimes and fewer adverse events. Its innovative mechanism and pharmacological profile supports its potential as a next-generation NSAID for OA and pain management, particularly in populations at high risk for NSAID-induced adverse effects. Further, larger long-term studies are warranted to confirm its medical benefits and broader therapeutic applications. Thank you for listening to JAPI Podcast. Thank you.